We just got more news about future, yo, but I already recorded audio. If it's kinda out of date, I'm sorry, bro, so just keep that in mind and enjoy the show. Whoa! So, this is gonna be a bit of an addendum to one of my previous videos. When I talked about Steven's potential corruption, I mentioned two possible methods for such an event to play out. One involves Steven taking a hit for Jasper during a fight, and her later coming around and understanding Steven's point of view, leading to a redemption. The other involves White Diamond finally going off on Steven for tossing her and the other diamonds to the side once the universe was saved. But after reading a bunch of your comments talking about how you wished both outcomes could happen, that got me thinking. Could we combine these two events into a story that still makes sense? Maybe with some extra bells and whistles for good measure? Well, it took me a little while, but I think I have an answer. 2 words. Road trip! Okay, stay with me. When I say road trip, I don't mean your typical crazy vacation with wacky shenanigans. I'm talking about Steven going from location to location searching for answers, solutions, or even just solace from his problems. I mean, this is still a series we're talking about, not a movie. It's going to have multiple episodes one way or another. And with so many questions unanswered and character fates undecided, not to mention the show's persistence to tie all major events to the main character, having Steven travel to old friends and old rivals on an episodic basis would be ideal for the second half. It will provide some fantastic build-up for a climax in Steven's arc while furthering the stories of the other characters we love along the way. Yeah, going from home world to home school to home... less. Wow, that's really depressing. But hey, that's nothing new for this series. As usual, I don't want to claim that anything I say in this video will happen. It's just my fanboy mind having a think session and pondering over a show that I really love, and I hope you all enjoy it.
So buckle up and pack your bags, people, cause we're riding on this emotional highway till you're driven to tears. Let's talk about Steven's rocky road trip.
Okay, that's too depressing. Put a sticker on there or something. Maybe 2? That's better. Okay, so I think most of us agree that the second half of Future will likely start with Steven leaving his home, or whatever's left of it, in some way, shape, or form. How exactly it'll play out is still up in the air, but the Gems will probably want to take extreme precaution at the moment. They'd want to ensure the stability of Steven's emotional state, not just for his own sake because they love him, but also for the sake of the planet's safety. They protected the planet enough times to know that leaving unknown gem powers unchecked could cause something catastrophic, something they might not be able to stop in time. So with this in mind, Steven's most logical move would be to sneak away from home when no one is looking. It's been clear from his dialogue and behavior that he is sick of all the life changes, pink diamond reminders, and even his own family to an extent. He just wants to be alone so he can have time to think things through, so it would make a lot of sense for him to ride solo for a while. Obviously the Gems would find out eventually, but it's hard to tell exactly how they would act. Future Vision might not help much since it would only show all the possible places that Steven might go first, and not necessarily where he is at the moment. And they'd probably find it dangerous to split up, because if Steven does end up doing something destructive, it would be a diamond level threat, meaning it would be much safer to have the whole group together to deal with that. But no matter what the Gems decide to do while Steven's away, one thing I really want to see is a little speech from Greg. Knowing what we know about Mr. Universe's origins, I'm sure he'd understand the choice to run away from one's current life when they're feeling unsure about how things are going. Heck, all it took was a U-turn and smashing through a fence with his van, and he got his wife, his friends, and his baby boy. Not that I'm encouraging that kind of behavior, vandalism is wrong, kids. But I'd love to hear Greg weigh into this situation, especially since we haven't really seen him since Bluebird, and I'm curious what he's been up to. He can definitely relate to Steven's issues on a personal and human level way more than the Gems ever could. Not to mention that the Gems will likely never know the confusing, troubling times of puberty and teenage angst. Lucky them.
I feel cranky and pubescent today, and I don't know why. Urgh, I'm gonna take it out on people I like.
So if Steven does make the choice to sporadically run away, where exactly is he going to go? While the road trip has multiple locations in the same way that this series will have multiple new episodes, the stops don't exactly have to be in this order, but hey, it's my fanfic, it's my AU, it's my prediction, so I'm just gonna put them in an order that I find the most fitting. Also, instead of Steven getting corrupted by the end of the story, we're going to take a look at another possibility for this wormy monster's origin, which is just as popular and likely as corruption. Alright, let's hit the road! When people initially get out of a frustrating situation or environment, the first course of action that most people take is doing something that lets them blow off steam. Maybe a run, maybe a video game, maybe a good vent or shout, or even just hitting something really hard, and I imagine that Steven might be having similar feelings when he first leaves. But considering that this is diamond level anger, he'd probably want to do it in a very isolated location. Maybe with a sparring partner who's been able to handle his aggressive power before, and he believes that Jasper is just the gem for the job. The scenario I described in my corruption video is pretty much the same here, so I won't go into explicit detail. He goes to Jasper, asks her for a no-holds-bar rematch, she's more than happy to do so, they fight for a while as Steven gets more and more violent, until finally he gets so mad that he unleashes an incredibly powerful laser attack that even he didn't know he could perform. I know a lot of people have problems with Steven constantly gaining new powers in future, calling it plot convenience, but Steven learning new powers due to extreme emotion has always been a core part of the franchise, so it definitely makes sense to me. Jasper runs straight up to Steven from afar, he snaps to his senses while the laser is still charging up, he tries to stop it but doesn't know how, so instead he encases himself in his own bubble, the laser goes off, and he takes the bullet for Jasper. Initially I said that the diamond laser bouncing off Rose's shield is what caused corruption in the first place, which a lot of you thought couldn't be true. I mean, the diamonds say multiple times that no one was meant to survive their attack, which means they probably knew it was deadly by nature, unless they never used it before and just assumed it was deadly. But regardless, for this scenario, let's just say that each individual diamond laser is just a powerful beam of energy, you need all four for a planet-wiping attack, and different combinations of the 4 diamond lasers just cause strange mutations to whoever's on the receiving end.
Everybody got that? Good!
So Steven emerges from his bubble, not corrupted but severely hurt. Jasper gets frustrated that Steven didn't fight her with his full potential. He chickened out. He's still weak. He's still soft. He's still pathetic. Steven angrily gets up looking like he's about to rebuke, but he just exhales and says, "Yeah, I guess I am pathetic," and walks away. Jasper just folds her arms and goes back home. She's equal parts disappointed and angry now, but might eventually realize exactly what Steven was doing for her and possibly have a change of heart, respecting not just his physical strength, but also his strength of character. You know, eventually. Or even after another gem spells it out for her. I mean, I love Jasper to bits, but the girl is pretty set in her ways. She might need someone to explain everything first. Alright, so Steven fighting out his emotions didn't go too well, and he's not really in the mood to do any major traveling after all that combat. So he decides to pay the great and lovable Peridot a visit. We don't really know a whole lot about Peri's living conditions since we've barely seen her all season. Disappointing, I know. She seems to be living in Little Homeworld along with Bismuth and Lapis, and if I know Peri, which I do, she'd probably want to live in a place akin to her old countryside home, possibly without a lot of buildings around and with her own little patch of land that she can use for farming. So Steven drops by her place and asks if he could stay for a while, which he's perfectly fine with. He also mentions his newfound skill for growing plants, but also mentions that it led to a massive accidental disaster. Peridot says that he shouldn't let one mistake deter him from a favorite activity, and maybe she could even bring up some mistakes that she's made during her first time farming. Steven's hesitant, but agrees to help her grow some crops the next day. So they get the supplies ready, and things seem to be going okay for a little bit, but Peridot notices that every time Steven plants a seed, he checks his hand extremely closely. She asks him what's wrong, and he's saying that he wants to make sure that there isn't any spit on his hands each time, to avoid any accidents like last time. He has this paranoid attitude for the entire day, not wanting to eat lunch because he thinks he might be a messy eater and accidentally spit on the ground, not wanting to take a nap because he thinks he might drool in his sleep, and eventually Peridot thinks that they should just call it a day and go to bed. But Steven won't be able to sleep and would be up all night staring at the field, making absolute sure he didn't accidentally spit on any of the crops. Maybe he'll even hear some strange noises that just wind up being animals, and eventually he just can't take it anymore. If he's going to be this worried about accidental spit in the soil, then he's just gotta get out of there. No more plants, no more farming, in fact, no more earth for a while. so he sneaks off in the night when Peridot's not looking and moves to his next destination. Along with getting a full-fledged Peridot appearance, which this series has been sorely lacking, here we would have Steven being terrified due to more traumatic events of the past. This isn't something 100% new to him, heck, mindful education alone proves that fact, but with this confused, upset state and the fact that he's clearly not accepting help from his loved ones, it's gonna take a pretty big toll on him for sure. And after having both anger and fear eat him alive, and even keeping him from sleeping and eating, the desire to just escape and leave everything behind for a while would be completely understandable. Also, just a side note, if we do get a Peridot themed episode of any kind, an update on the status of Pumpkin would be appreciated. I'll record my live reaction, I'll buy a pumpkin plush, I'll hug it so hard the stuffing comes out. Yeah, it'll be great. By this point, Lars and the Off-Colors are probably already in space going on their fantastic voyage, as pointed out in Little Graduation. So with Steven's next decision to just leave Earth altogether, he finds Lion, who was left in the house to watch over the place while the gems look for Steven, climbs through the kitty's mane and winds up back on the Sun Incinerator. Lars is initially a little peeved that Steven would just show up uninvited, but after telling Lars about his situation, Steven is allowed to tag along for the adventures as long as he promises to work a job on the ship. Because whether your ship is seafaring or spacefaring, you gotta make sure you pull your weight if you want to stay.
You're gonna come on my boat and not do work.
But while Steven originally planned to get some much needed solace in the quiet solitude of space, he eventually realizes that life aboard a space vessel is a lot more stressful than he thought. Instant spontaneous danger can pop up at any moment, enemies could be on their tail for who knows how long, high pressure situations can occur on and off deck, different planets mean constantly changing rules of gravity, atmosphere, and wildlife, and eventually it gets extremely overwhelming for Steven. He might lash out at the crew or even refuse to do his job after a while. Heck, one of his pink energy waves might short out the ship's electronics and force them to land and repair. Obviously, this would cause a lot of discourse between Steven and the others, and eventually they would probably agree that it's best if Steven find a different place to go. He climbs back through Lars's hair and returns home to find Lion just resting on his bed. With all that's been going on, Steven only wishes he could be that relaxed. Steven still doesn't want to hang around Earth for very long, especially since the gems could come back at any moment, so he decides to go with his second option for Earth-based escapism, and that of course would be... After taking the homeworld warp, Steven returns to the Diamond Palace. Spinel is actually the first one to greet him since the other diamonds are off on royal business at the moment. She talks about how life in the palace is fun, but it's nice to see a familiar face after a long time. She gives Steven a grand tour of the place, showing him all the things that have changed since he left. He even gets to reunite with the Pebbles for a short while, and they're very happy to see him. Though at one point during the tour, Steven eventually comes across a room or place in the palace that he's never seen before. And surprise, surprise, it contains something else terrible that his mom did that he was never told about. First a war, then Spinel, then Pink Pearl, and now this? He's done being surprised by terrible things his mom did. He asks Spinel if there's any time that he could meet with all the diamonds at once, and she says that they've been having regular meetups in Blue's bathroom like they used to do during Era 1. So Steven pops in during that off time, the diamonds are initially happy to see him, but he quickly cuts to the chase and tells them that he wants to know everything there is to know about Pink Diamond. He's sick of the surprises, and he wants all the info right in front of him right away. The diamonds are clearly a little upset, but White agrees to take Steven up in her ship to let out the full truth. And this leads to another scenario I've covered before. All three diamonds tell Steven the extent of Pink Diamond's behavior, Steven's rage builds to a point where he starts destroying the ship, White begs Steven to stop, Steven tells her to leave him alone, and then White scolds him for leaving them alone for so long, abandoning them when they still needed help, guidance, and love from him. But this time, instead of lasers being involved, it'll basically just be a heavy heated argument involving all three diamonds venting their emotions out towards Steven. Words will be said, the ship will likely be heavily damaged, meaning who's ever piloting will need to make a landing while this argument's going on, and in the end, Steven will come to the realization that his mom was not the problem in this situation. Right here, right now, everything was his fault. Someone desperately needed him, and he wasn't there to help them. Again, same as last time. The ship crash lands back on homeworld and Steven is just in panic mode at this point. He makes a mad dash for the homeworld warp, but the diamond's on his tail. They'll either yell at him to leave or try to apologize for what they said, but Steven tells them to keep away from him since he doesn't want to hurt them anymore as he returns home. At this point, he hasn't only exhausted all his options, but he's pretty much made things worse for everyone he's encountered. He sits on the bed with Lion, his house still empty and partially wrecked. He thinks back to when times were a lot more simple and when he was a lot more happy, possibly by looking at memorabilia on his shelf, when he would eat cookie cats or play volleyball on the beach or go on small-scale missions or discuss books with Connie or... Wait! Connie...
On the road again. Sing it with me, Shrek. I can't wait to get on the road again.
What did I say about singing?
Yup, turns out he wasn't out of options after all. So he goes to the one last person who he hasn't seen in quite a while. His best friend, someone who always makes him feel better, someone whose life he hasn't ruined yet, Connie. He says that things are pretty rough at home and she allows Steven to stay with her for a while, but the time he spends with her quickly reveals just how packed her new schedule is. Connie not only needs to dedicate time to college prep, but she also has a day job, new friends, and plenty of other commitments. So many in fact that Steven is barely able to hang out with her at all, kind of defeating the purpose of even going there in the first place. Eventually she gets some free time and Steven suggests that they do something special. They decide to go on a little date on the beach and even choose to form Stevani just like old times. Things start off well enough, they have some fun, they pal around together, but then Connie gets a call for another appointment she has to make. They try to unfuse, but there's a little bit of resistance on Steven's end. He asks if they can stay for just a little longer, but Connie says no. There's a back and forth between them, making the fusion more and more unstable. Connie tells Steven to knock it off and that they'll be able to hang out when she's done. But Steven angrily asks when that will be because she's never around. She's never available and it feels like he doesn't matter anymore. This obviously brings out Pink Steven again and it affects the Stevani fusion as well, similar to what it did with Smokey. The only problem? Connie is 100% human and incapable of handling the power that comes with Pink Steven. We don't know this for sure, but it's a likely possibility. She screams in pain, making Steven snap back to reality and immediately let go of the fusion. He sees that Pink Stevani badly harmed Connie, so he takes her back home to rest. He tells Connie's mom what happened and uses his healing powers to try and help. She checks Connie's heart, blood pressure, and breathing and confirms that she's fine and that she just needs to rest. She asks if Steven still wants to stay since he didn't intend to hurt her, but Steven agrees that it would be better if he just leaves before anything else happens. And now comes the end of Steven's road trip. All possibilities exhausted. He can't find out his problems because his power is too intense and he could easily hurt others. He can't participate in old hobbies because he's too scared of traumatic events from the past. He can't escape from his problems because his anger and emotional baggage will always stay with him regardless of location. Learning about his mom's wrongdoings won't help since he's the one causing the problems at the moment, not her, and he can't even go back to his old nostalgic childhood because his best friend is so busy that she's starting to leave him behind, and his problems are actually causing her pain as well. All this time he's been trying to think of an answer to his problems, but now the answer is clear to him. He's not a friend or a savior or a crystal gem, he's a monster. A savage, hurtful monster. And with this mentality, we finally get the reveal of that big old worm creature. Steven changes his form into that of a scary, gigantic worm creature, brought on not by corruption, but by his own image of how he sees himself at the moment. He walks away to parts unknown, hoping to never run into another human or creature again. The less people hurt by him, the better. Wow. Forget about my heart snapping in half. If this happens, my heart would snap in half, the halves would break into pieces, the pieces would be stomped into dust, I'd vacuum up the dust, it'd be thrown out in the trash, and then the wind would blow it back in through the open window so I have to vacuum it again. So it would definitely be emotional, but would it also be logical? Well, as we saw in volleyball, it's definitely possible for a gem's physical form to alter depending on a damaged mental state, regardless of what the condition of their actual gem is. And it's possible for such an idea to make a comeback and affect Steven in a similar way, just on a much larger scale, considering that he's a diamond. The concept of Steven taking on a form based on how he sees himself is incredibly powerful, and the fact that it was built up by multiple negative events instead of just one event makes for really effective build-up and good use of episodes. And of course, you can cap it off with a really touching ending where everyone that Steven helped comes to help him in his greatest time of need, showing that all his self-doubt and hatred wasn't justified because at the end of the day, in spite of some mistakes, he really did make the galaxy a better place, and his friends just need to remind him of that. I'm still on the fence over exactly how I want this worm creature to be used, since there are so many inventive possibilities that everyone can come up with. So many touching moments that could be milked from it. So many story points that can be covered. So many tears to be shed for how much this poor kid is going through. He once held the whole universe close to his heart, but now it's like no one even wants him in it anymore. So much amazing but tragic potential. Or hey, maybe the worm is just Pink Diamond's pet that she abandoned just like Spinel, and we're all getting excited for absolutely nothing. I really hope that's not the case. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Tell me where you think Steven's road of life will lead next, and subscribe for more Steven Universe future and cartoon content coming at ya. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I hope to see you all real soon.